looking inside of yourself to understand actually what you're looking for as an individual.
Thought, what if I leave now and I have a career that's been half as good as the one that I've just had, then it'll be all right.
And I think purpose changes more than values, in my opinion. My purpose has certainly changed.
I wanted to go out there and be free of shackles and go and just...
Be Andy Wright.
Yeah, be Andy Wright.
Welcome to episode 1, first one of the Mission to Mission podcast. I brought in a good friend of mine, Andy Wright, into kind of kick us off with the podcast. Andy served for 23 years in the RAF. He was a wing commander, flew Tornado fighter jets. He was a military diplomat in Washington. He left the military in 2019 and joined Salesforce, who I had a big crush on for quite a while, as an account executive, and now he is the regional sales director for Splunk. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a joy. We do a lot of Friday morning walks, so this is
it's a little different to our usual conversation, Ben, but hopefully it'll still flow the same way.
Yeah, we download for 2 hours every Friday morning.
Yeah,
walking the dogs. So I get to. It's like a coaching session. It's
cathartic.
It is very nice. Yeah,
it's a great hour in the week.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I will. I think you've done a pretty good job of it. So yes, I 23 years in the Air Force. I left school knowing what I wanted to do. I grew up in an Air Force household. My dad was also a pilot. And so from a very young age, having been sat in an F4 Phantom and thought, yeah, this will do for me, when I was about 9 years old. And then growing up at RAF Scampton, where the Red Arrows were training overhead my school every single day, it was really it was set in stone that I was going to go and be a pilot. But it was a long, tough road to get to a cockpit in the end. But I was very fortunate to make it to, as you say, the Tornado, the bomber, not the fighter. So I flew the GR1, GR4 strike variant of the airplane.
Clearly an ex-army guy who has a zero.
That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Fighter pilot sounds so much cooler.
Yeah, I mean, I've always known you as a fighter pilot, Andy. So,
and so yes. Then went through. I was again very, very fortunate to have a career where I managed to stay in cockpit almost all the way through my career. I completed a couple of staff tours. Served on operations in Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan. As you say, I worked in the Pentagon, which was my very last tour, which was a fascinating job. It was doing a military diplomacy job during the Trump years, but also worked in the JTAC community, which is Joint Terminal Attack Controllers. So the interface between Army and Air Force. Spent quite a lot of time there. Was a flying instructor. Did the US Marine Corps Weapons Tactics Instructor course, which was just such fun. And yeah, just I think really it was a career where I was the thing that I loved the most about my career in the Air Force was the variety of it. I did all sorts of different roles, but I spent probably most of my time in cockpit flying the Hawk, which most people will know is the airplane the Red Arrows fly. I wasn't a Red Arrow. But I did command a Hawk squadron up in North Yorkshire, number 100 squadron, which is or was the Royal Air Force's aggressor squadron. And the best way to describe that, and I'm sorry, I hate the Top Gun reference, but if you think about Top Gun, the little black airplanes in Top Gun who are the baddies, that's what 100 squadron does, and that was such a fun job. And commanding that squadron, number 100 squadron, was without doubt the greatest job I'll ever have. I got to fly airplanes every day, and I got to lead a team of about 120 people. We got to go all over the world and do all sorts of really fun things. Yeah, so as I come into any job now, people say, oh, well, you're never going to have a job like that. Doesn't it feel like a bit of an anticlimax? And my answer is no. I was privileged to do it. And it was great fun while it lasted, and now there are other challenges ahead.
Yeah, it's I didn't even know that. I didn't know that you were in the aggressor squadron, and the analogy is good because I think everyone will relate to it. We know the little black airplanes that are, yeah. You had an amazing career, and then you left.
I did. I actually turned down promotion to leave. My closest friends are my university friends and my school friends, and unlike a lot of people who I went to university, and I went through University Air Squadron, and I have still many close friends who I went through university with. But most of my closest friends at university were nothing to do with the Air Force, and the same for my school friends, and I loved that. I'm a very, very proud veteran. I loved my time in the military, but I always preferred to be Andy rather than Wing Commander Wright. I always struggled with being called sir, or wearing rank on my shoulder. Doesn't mean I wasn't proud to wear the uniform, and I sure as hell was proud to wear my wings. Anyone will tell you that. But I just loved having that grounding of the outside and the real world, because right, that living in the military, you can be at risk of being this little bubble, this weird bubble, and not really understanding what's going on outside. And so as I stayed friends with my network on the outside, I was always interested that they were doing so many different things. And I thought, look, I'm so privileged to have the best job in the world, and I genuinely believe I had the best job in the world. But I thought, look, at some point I'm not going to be flying airplanes forever. At some point I'm going to be flying a desk, and I can either fly a desk in the military, which will be very nice, thank you, go and try and achieve relatively senior rank, or I can go and do something different. And I made the decision. I'd served exactly 23 years, and I had 23 years left to go to my state pension age. And I thought, what if I leave now and I have a career that's been half as good as the one that I've just had, then it'll be all right. And so I chose to turn down promotion to group captain, and thought I'm going to go and do something completely different. It was with a heavy heart, and I think any veteran who's left for any reason will look back and go, you know what, I do miss it, but I will tell you why I've never looked back over my shoulder since I left.
And you made that big decision, and it is a big decision. And it's funny because I've never known you as Wing Commander Wright. I know you as Andy Wright. You operate with a level of integrity. You tell it how it is. I know you as that kind of person who you can talk to if you've got a challenge. You've probably developed over your time in the military. But then you made this massive move, which is a big move. But like you said, you've got a long second career out of the RAF. What was that process for you? What were you thinking about initially? Like, what makes you tick? What made you tick at that point?
Yeah, just before I answer that question, I must follow up on the comment you just made. I love the fact that you were a sergeant and I was a senior officer, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And the fact that it means nothing to us. And I think for any veteran who's out there and thinking about coming to community, that I love that the best thing about the vets community in general is that it's very flat. Rank disappears when you come out to the real world, and you can be inspired by anybody who's come from anywhere. So keep your mind open. What makes me tick?
And what made you tick at that point as well? I know that things change as an individual.
Do you know I can source it back to an exact moment in time. I went and did a wonderful course called the Windsor Leadership course, and I was very privileged that I was sponsored to go and do it with the military. And I was asked at the time by the facilitator there, what are your values? And I sort of sat there, and now I've said that everybody who's listening will be sitting there doing the same thing I did at that point, and go like, what are my values? And if you've never really thought about them, you'll come up with a few words. And I would say, write them down right now, write them down. And then go away and have a think about it properly. And that's what I did. I actually went back I was working in Washington at the time, and I sat down over a number of hours and thought. I went through a process of what are my values. We probably haven't got time for me to explain how to do that now, but what is it that really underpins who I am? And I'd never really thought about it, and I was kind of a bit embarrassed, really. I was about 40, and I'd never really thought about this. I'd never really taken time to understand myself, but it was super helpful. And once I'd sat down and really crystallized, what underpins me, they haven't really changed from then to now. I won't bore you with what they are, but also just as I was going through my development process, my the career transition partnership process, our collective group was asked, "What's your purpose?" I was sat in between two stars who are both impressive men, both of whom I'd worked for, and we sort of had this conversation, and we all came up with ours. And again, mine's only modified slightly since that day, but it's underpinned by my values, and I think it's short and pithy and articulates really what makes me tick. Help people, solve problems that improve lives, and if I unpack all three of those things, I can almost say there's a head and a heart and a hands part to them. That they the first part, helping people, that's a head thing for me. When I think about what I really, really love talking about and thinking about is people. They're fascinating. And that's why I'm so interested in leadership and development and collaborating with others. The hands part of it is the selfish bit, the stuff I like doing, solving problems. That's what really, I love creative thinking, collaborating, innovating. And then the heart part, which is the improving lives, is my general sort of view of the world. If I could teach my sons one lesson for life, it's leave this earth as a net contributor, and I think that's the way to go. Sometimes you give, sometimes you take, but if you leave the world having given more than you've taken, then you've done well.
I've been through my own kind of journey since I left the military, but to even think about sitting down and writing these things down, I expect quite alien to people. It's the more I meet people like you and speak with people like you and form friendships, I understand more about that looking inside of yourself to understand actually what you're looking for as an individual. But you just said values and purpose, which are completely different, right? And I think purpose changes more than values, in my opinion. My purpose has certainly changed over time because you have family and blah 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 things happen in your life. But that is an alien exercise. To say to someone, sit down and really think about what makes you tick.
Yeah, it's actually. Look, I said it's too long to explain. It's not that hard. It does take time. I'm very happy to share on the platform if you like. I created sort of a one-page exercise to help you think about how to do it. But really, it's thinking about things like where have you come from. Most of your values, for example, are created in your formative years, no matter where you've come from. And a great example of that is Nelson Mandela. Everyone's heard of Ubuntu. That came from him when he was a kid, the tribe that he lived in. And it was kind of one of his founding principles for life. It guided him through life. And if you think about the things that you really care about, a lot of them will have been created when you were younger. Not all of them. A great way to think about what your values are or are not is, who are your friends? What is it about your friends that you admire? When have you found yourselves in times of triumph where you've really, you've done really well, you've felt really proud of yourself? What made you feel that way? When have you felt angry? What made you feel that way? Who are famous people that you follow? What sort of news sources do you read? What do you care about? And as you sit down and think about these things, it's capturing what's the emotion that's attached to that. And then what I did, I sat down for 6-7 hours and thought about all sorts of different questions and just wrote words down. And then I ended up with this massive mind map of words. And then you go, okay, right, where's the correlation here? Where are the things that I'm saying the most? And you boil it down, and eventually you'll come to the point where you can go, okay, right, these are the things I really care about. The one thing I would say about values, and I've seen this several times in the corporate world, you'll come to a coaching session or a team session, a development session. Someone will give you a list of words. Choose your values from this list. Do not do that. Selecting values from a menu is just selecting words that you like the sound of. You've got to sit down in a dark room with a towel over your head and go, right, who am I? And then when you know that, you can go to that menu of words and go, are there any words that really articulate beautifully what I'm feeling here? Because that can be helpful.
Yeah, amazing. So you've figured out what was important to you. I heard it secondhand. I didn't hear it from you. You were surprised that I knew this yesterday when we spoke. But you have an interesting story about how you landed the job at Salesforce. So the process that you went through. I mean, for those who are listening who don't know much about Salesforce, commercial organization, tech, OG, original gangster, and from a SaaS, software as a service perspective, big business, and not an easy place to get a job. In my opinion, you need to be of a certain level of individual, I think, to get a job that you've been there, so you might question that and say, well, some people maybe not of that level. But what was that for you? What was that process for you? Because it's super interesting.
Again, I go back to my friends. So as I reached sort of, I think I was about 38 years old, which was the pension age in the Air Force for me. I'd reached the point where I qualified for a pension. I thought, okay, right now it's going to be a time for me to either think about staying permanently or going. And I was having lots of conversations with lots of friends and thinking about, am I going to go into Civvy Street or am I going to stay in the Air Force long term? And one of my old school friends, Phil, crikey, it must be like 2010 now. And he said to me, Andy, you should think about Salesforce. And I was kind of, what's a Salesforce? At that time I think I was commanding the squadron at the time. And it was just something I was just
how many years was you? This is the crazy thing. I've actually said this to Salesforce about people from the military. I left in 2017, and I would not have been able to tell you who Salesforce are.
No, and no, it's funny. When I was working with Salesforce, I used to say to people, I work for the biggest company you've never heard of. Yeah.
F1, now you see them.
They are becoming more and more visible. And look, they're a tech giant. They are a phenomenon for sure. But yeah, Phil sort of said, he said, look, think about Salesforce, and I went away, and he was very, very kind to me and helped connect me with people. Some veterans who were already working in Salesforce, who were willing to have conversations with me about the tech world, SaaS, Salesforce itself, different roles.
Is this back in 2010? Or
this
is later?
This is now when I was in Washington, really. So 2017, 2009. So I think when I was in Washington, I kind of made the decision I'm probably going to go.
How early on did you start that kind of networking?
The transition. I started it in earnest about 18 months before I left.
So you're doing some work prior.
Yeah. But also one of the great things about the Salesforce military program is that they have an online platform called Trailhead, and Trailhead is it's accessible to many, but and you can learn anything from the simplest things. What is blockchain? What is AI? What is software as a service? All the way up to becoming a fully fledged Salesforce admin or architect, and you can get as technical as you like. And it's a very clever way. They attach sort of learning badges and the paths are well done. Anybody can go on there and learn, but you have to pay for certificates. But they provide certification for military veterans and their families for free. So if you want to go and get free tech qualifications as a vet, that I can't really say there's anywhere better to go. If you have Salesforce qualifications, you will find a job in the Salesforce ecosystem. It's huge.
But it also gives you. I mean, I've been into Trailhead. It also gives you some pretty solid foundations around different.
It does.
Not even necessarily Salesforce, just in general.
No, exactly as I say. What is blockchain? What's AI? And so what I did was I just set myself a task every day of spending an hour in Trailhead, and I learned a lot about a lot, and it was all very difficult. I'm not technically minded. I flew airplanes for a living. I love talking about, as I say, I love thinking about people and abstract things. Ones and zeros are not my natural place to be. So I had to spend a lot of time just getting used to the lexicon, and I spent a good year doing that. And you work through your badges, and you get different levels. And I got to a pretty competent level of understanding, so that when I came to my exit point, then I had not only a grounding in Salesforce, but exactly to say, moreover, a broad understanding of the digital world. It's important to stop here, probably, Ben, and say, look, why digital? As I say, I had a 23-year career ahead of me, and I didn't want to go and do a job that would fade out. And for anybody who's out there thinking, I'm going to come out of the military and I'm going to go do something different, once you've figured out what your purpose is and the things that you want to go and do, or the areas you might want to look at, it still feels like a big old field to choose from. And one thing that I thought was, okay, I don't want to be an airline pilot. It just felt like I'd just be clocking in and clocking off and doing the same job forever. And that's no disrespect to airline pilots. I have many friends who do it. It just wasn't for me. I didn't want to go into the defense industry, because it felt to me that I would leave and be asked, okay, what rank were you? What's your pension? Yeah. Okay, that's your job. Yeah. I wanted to go out there and be free of shackles and go and just
be Andy Wright.
Yeah. Be Andy Wright.
Not Wing Commander Wright.
Love it. Go and be Andy Wright. Yeah. And so that's and I thought, okay, where to go? And after this year, Phil, a few other people, the tech industry seemed like the right place for me. As I kind of came out into that wider world, and I've done all this research now with Salesforce, I'm thinking, right, okay, I'm going to try and get into that world. It still wasn't necessarily on the cards. It was just a place where I thought, right, this is going to be my focus, and that's where I'll start. Yeah.
And what was the process then? So you did a lot of networking for 18 months. You did a lot of groundwork, Trailhead, playing around with that. How do you get that? How do you get the interview? And then how do you get through that interview process? I assume it's like multi-stage interview panels.
It was, yeah. So remember, this is 2019, and global context is important. I left the Air Force on the very last day of 2019, and just before that, so I'm in that transition period where you're still serving, but you're not working, and you're finding your way. Salesforce has a huge conference every year.
Oh, so you went to Salesforce World?
No, Dreamforce.
Dreamforce. Oh, you went to the Dreamforce.
Yeah, I went to Dreamforce. Yeah, which was, and I'd actually been to a couple of world tours. There'd been one in Washington, and there'd been another one back in the UK. But Dreamforce is really, really hard to get to, and it's in San Francisco. And my sister was living in San Fran at the time, and I remember ringing up Phil and saying, "Look, I bought tickets to San Francisco. I'm going to be in San Francisco, and Dreamforce is on. What are the chances?" And just made my own luck, really. A ticket became available, and I was able to go as a non-employee. I managed to blag a free ticket, and just got to go and immerse myself in the world. And I got to spend time with salespeople. Now, I'd never ever expected that I wanted to go into sales, into tech sales. Most of us in the military think of sales as double glazing, carpets, car showrooms, and I was of that similar bias, right? But I got to hang around with a couple of really talented, generous people who just let me hang out with them and understand what their game was. And very quickly I realized that sales is really about people. It's about people, it's about communication, it's about relationships.
Especially when you're selling expensive, very expensive.
Yeah, very expensive Salesforce. And so that kind of set this kernel in my mind, and then an opportunity comes up, and a sales opportunity comes up, and I had a couple of conversations with a couple of people, some people who worked at Salesforce, some people who didn't, who were friends, and said, "Look, am I crazy? It's like, is it worth going for?" And the bottom line was, with again great support and encouragement from Phil, I went for it, and somehow found myself in a pre-interview and introduced to a couple of other veterans who were already in the Salesforce community, who I won't name drop so I don't embarrass them, but they know who they are, who are very, very helpful in guiding me to get to the right point, and went in for the panel.
There's one name, first name begin with J.
There was a J, there's a G, there's an S, they're all good people. You know them all.
So I want to dig into then the story in this interview, because I think it's a really good lesson to people. You were asked, and you can correct me if I'm a little bit off with this, but you were asked how a time within your career, within your life, where you've sold. Is that right?
Yeah.
In the interview process.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you were a pilot. So it's a difficult question. So how did you tackle that?
Yeah, I remember the exam question was, come in and tell us a story about when you've sold something. And you're absolutely right. Look, I'm a military guy. We don't sell. But then you think, look, if you consider a sale as a transaction for something, that you're exchanging money for a good or service, that is a type of selling. But as I've sort of learned more and more about being a good salesperson, selling is an enterprise sale, for example, end to end. You're conducting all sorts of different sales between the point where the customer says, "I'm interested," to the point where you're closing $1 million deal.
You're speaking to 30 different people,
correct,
stakeholders,
and you're selling internally. It's about convincing, influencing, and getting to a goal. And it might be an exchange, might be, give me some of your time and I'll give you some ideas. That's a transaction in a way. And so I don't know how I did it, but somehow I managed to just grasp that thread for my interview. And the story that I told in my interview was selling airpower to the Iraqis. and I told a story about how I'd gone on operations in 2014, and I'd found myself embedded in the Baghdad Ministry of Defence, who were at the time struggling with Daesh coming in through the north of the country and conducting horrific acts, and the Iraqi armed forces and security forces were overrun, and we were in there trying to help them to solve that problem. And now, of course, we didn't have any people on the ground at the time, but we were able to support them with airpower, amongst other things. And there was a very small contingent of us who were working in Baghdad, and just trying to help the Iraqi generals figure out how they were going to push the bad guys back. The story is really just me, this lowly wing commander who, when you walk into the MOD in Baghdad, as you do, you're surrounded by lots and lots of gold stars. Lots of there were lots of caricatures of Saddam Hussein. It was so funny. Everyone had a beautiful mustache and mirrored shades and gold braid, and there was the room was full of cigarette smoke, and but they, these were, you had to be respectful to start with. These were people who, on my first tour, and I was out overhead Baghdad. They didn't like me, but what they knew was that I understood the technology that they needed, and so with careful diplomacy, we sort of we got together with some great interpreters and some American colleagues, and we sort of sat down and went, okay, right, this is how you can start thinking about airpower. This is how you can use airpower. And what was phenomenal, what was astounding to me at the time was, these are people who are 20, 30 year military folks, because they'd never really had airpower as we know it. They didn't really have the first clue about how it worked. They just knew that it was extremely potent. And so I kind of told the story at Salesforce, which was, look, this is how you go to somebody and go, right, you need this technology. You need this technology, but you don't know how to acquire it, and then how to implement it and how to use it. And that really is similar in the digital world. You're going to customers who know, the number of times I hear customers say, like, I want to do digital transformation, or I want to use AI. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Well, that's everything I know about it. Okay, right, good. So it's going in there and sitting down with them and going, right, these are the fundamentals. This is what you need. This is what you don't need. This is where I can help you. This is where I can't help you, and this is what it's going to take for you to roll that out. But of course, through that time in Baghdad, you have your detractors, right? You have those people who hate you because you're the person who was, the enemy not too long ago. And again, just like a sale, an enterprise sale, you have people who might have a jaundiced view of you or your company. And so you have to get over that. You have to get in there.
Or like change.
Yeah.
You get all sorts of people in these bigger deals, don't you? That just
or they're invested in something that's already working, or is partially working. And so you have to kind of bring them a journey and go, look, I'm not here to replace. I'm here to support. I'm here. And going back to my work in the closed air support community, the JTAC community I mentioned, I always used to say, look, I understand that I'm supporting you. I always, as an aviator, some of my Air Force brothers and sisters are going to hate me for saying this, I always felt really that I was supporting. You can't hold ground without people. So the people on the who are actually on the ground under fire, under pressure, I am supporting. And really, I kind of that's the mindset I have. And I now when I have conversations with people about tech, and with what we do at Splunk, my current company, one of the first things I'll say is, we're not here to replace what you have. We're here to augment it, support it, and enable it.
It's a good all of this is a good lesson, like just try and be creative in the way that you describe how what you've done relates to that company. For not even people in the military, just anyone who's looking to switch career, right? Like it's a challenging thing to say, when have I sold? If you're going into sales, when have I sold? And it is a transaction, and I love that story. I think it's great. It's just a really good lesson. I want the listeners to be able to leave this with 3 like really key actionable takeaways from Andy Wright. So what have you got for me?
I think, I sort of, as I was preparing for this, I thought about a couple of things. I've talked about one, really, which is learn to be a great storyteller. Again, if you go onto the Redeployable platform, then you'll see I'll put a couple of articles on there. But I wrote one article which was called "The Industry is Mars and Military is from Venus." When you're thinking about coming out of the service, you will struggle with things like social media. We're taught in the military not to be too prevalent on social, too visible on social media. You'll struggle with going out and telling stories about yourself, because we're taught in the military, wind your neck in, keep your head down, and those are don't lose those values. Humility is a great value, along with many others that we learn in the military. But you don't have to forfeit your humility to learn how to sell yourself. What you do need to do, though, is to cut the jargon. Right? No one cares that you were 2IC of MT. At 90 SU, whatever. No one cares, right? You need to be able to explain in clear language what it is that you've done. But more importantly, when you sit down, when you've done that, still thinking about, who am I, what are my values, what are my purpose, you will come up with stories. As you're doing that process, you'll come up with stories. Capture those, because as you're trying to translate your service from what you did in the past into what you can do in the future. If you can articulate it in an unfamiliar language, then you're going to be on a firm footing. And the best way to do that, as I say, is learn to tell stories. Learn to tell stories and be prepared to sell yourself. And I think the other thing is just in terms of as you're thinking about going forwards and the challenges, you are going to face a heck of a lot of challenges. And it'll feel like you're alone when you're coming out of service. But one of the greatest comforts that I found as I was coming out of service, and it brought me to meet you eventually, Ben, is that the veteran community is extremely generous. Reach out to veterans, whether you know them or you don't, and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about coming into the world. Can you help?" I was blown away by the number of coffees and beers that I was bought by complete strangers who were willing to give me advice and time. And that's really why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, because I believe in paying it back. The veteran community is phenomenally supportive and will help you.
Amazing. Yeah, funnily enough, Andy, I had an alarm set every day. I think I've still got it in my phone. That said, always tell stories. Went off at 6 o'clock in the morning. Before I went to the gym, always tell stories, and that was my alarm, because I was always taught, give context around whatever you're talking about, whatever you're trying to sell. So yeah, and it's amazing. So everything you just said there resonated with me. The coffees I've had, the people like yourself that I've met, putting myself out there, challenging, but people will support. I think all amazing advice, and that's it. It's just much shorter than our walks.
It was, I feel like we've only got to the first mile.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Andy. Thanks so much for coming in. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks again for having me. I'll see you next Friday.
And if you want to listen to more people, amazing people like Andy Wright, rate us, leave us a 5-star review, share with your friends, and join the Redeployable community. I'll see you next time.